Welcome back to the Greg Schreffler Show, where we talk about anything and everything that has God in it. Why? Because we gotta. Hope you like the intro music. It's called U.S. National Anthem Instrumental Background Music by Visual Habit at pixabay.com. Announcements. Well, it's another brutal week concerning the care of my mother. And I don't even know if I should be sharing this with you, except maybe some of you are praying and this gives you some detail about that. Or anyway, I don't know. But yeah, it's brutal. By the way, some of the images that you see that depict an individual are not necessarily accurate, because lots of times, artists, there's not an actual accurate image of someone from the past, and artists just make something up that makes it believable. So just be aware of that. I don't know. I just wanted to get that out of the way. Don't forget to support the show. Registered at Givesend and GoFundMe. And if you want to let me know that you're praying for me, Givesend has a way for you to register just for that. And I try to keep updates going on the sites, but it's difficult. Time is spread all over. If you can't watch, you can listen on your preferred podcast platform. All right, let's get it on. Welcome to episode 58 of the Greg Schreffler Show. And we are on series episode 6 of America 250, Truth, Faith, and Freedom. In our last episode, we watched John Wolfe and Rebecca, the woman once known as Pocahontas, enter into marriage, a union that brought a season of fragile peace to Virginia. But while we learned that these two were married, we didn't explore what led to that moment. And I want to take a moment to inform you about John Wolfe, because he did not take this decision lightly. Before vows were ever exchanged, he wrestled with questions of conscience, duty, faith, and the will of God. And to understand where Virginia was headed next, we first need to understand the struggle that came before the wedding. History preserves something very valuable, which is the writings of John Wolfe. And it reveals a man carefully examining his heart before making one of the most consequential decisions of his life. By 1614, Virginia had survived its earliest years of famine, disease, and uncertainty. New settlements were taking root. Tobacco was beginning to reshape the colony's future. Yet, beneath the appearance of stability, old wounds between the English settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy had not simply disappeared. Peace existed, but it remained fragile. Research brought to you by the Bible, the Internet, and AI. We'll start segment 1 right after this commercial. segment 1, to marry or not to marry. The surviving record from this period gives us a rare glimpse into the thoughts of one of Virginia's early settlers. Before this marriage took place, John Rolfe put his concerns in writing, not as a public announcement, but as a personal explanation of the decisions he was preparing to make. In his letter to Sir Thomas Dale, Rolfe described the conflict he faced as he considered marrying Rebecca. His words reveal a man aware that this decision involved far more than personal affection. It carried consequences for himself, for the colony, and for the relationship between the English settlers and the Powhatan people. Rolfe began by acknowledging that many people might question his intentions. He understood how unusual this marriage would appear, and anticipated criticism from those who believed his motives were driven by personal desire or worldly ambition. And rather than ignoring those concerns, he addressed them directly. Have you found that to be the best way to handle things in your life? Don't ignore them. Face them head on. He admitted that he had examined his own heart, asking whether his affection for Rebecca had clouded his judgment. Was he pursuing this marriage for his own benefit, or was there a greater purpose at work? These were not questions he brushed aside. They were questions he wrestled with before putting pen to paper. Do you have some heavy-weighted questions on your heart? Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 in the Berean says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Guard your heart. Everything you do flows from it. Whether in 17th century Virginia or today, our motives matter. We cannot always judge another person's heart with certainty, but we are all called to examine our own. This seems to be one of the things God has been working on with me lately. And I could sum it up in 2 words: mercy and humility. Under mercy, you have compassion. Under humility, you have putting others before yourself. For example, in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 4 in the NIV, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others." Now, for those of you watching, you can see on the screen that translation is a little bit different than the one that I quoted. It's still NIV, but I learned it in an earlier version. Anyway, Rolfe also recognized that this decision reached beyond 2 individuals. Rebecca was the daughter of Chief Wahunasaka, leader of Powhatan Confederacy. Any marriage between them would inevitably carry political, cultural, and religious implications. The future of the colony itself could be affected. Do your decisions reflect God's heart? History allows us to read Rolfe's words, but only God knew his heart completely. What we can say with confidence is Rolfe wanted his decision to withstand more than public opinion. He wanted it to withstand his own conscience. Do you have a clear conscience? Do you have a clean conscience? So let's look at 6 statements from his letter to Sir Thomas Dale, current governor at the time. Number 1, the stakes. The stakes are high. "It is a matter of no small moment, which toucheth me so nearly as the tenderness of my salvation." Air quotes. That doesn't sound like a casual decision. "Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to work his good pleasure." Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 through 13 in the English Standard, telling us to take spiritual matters seriously. Number 2, counsel. I freely subject myself to your grave and mature judgment, deliberation, approbation, and determination. Air quotes. It doesn't sound self-centered. Where no counsel is, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety. Proverbs 11:14 in the King James. So here he's seeking counsel outside of himself, which seems to demonstrate sincerity. Number 3, the flesh. Let therefore this my well-advised protestation be a sufficient witness if my chiefest intent and purpose be not no way led with the unbridled desire of carnal affection. Air quotes. So not a decision of the flesh. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test my thoughts. Point out anything you find in me that makes you sad, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Psalm 139, 23 through 24 in the Living. So he's examining his motives. And number 4, the why. But for the good of this plantation, for the honor of our country, for the glory of God, for my own salvation, and for the converting to the true knowledge of God and Jesus Christ, namely Pocahontas. Air quotes. Sounds like a sense of duty. Let every detail in your lives, words, actions, whatever be done in the name of the Master Jesus, thanking God the Father every step of the way. Colossians 3:17 in the Message. Whether Wolfe succeeded in those aims is for history and God to judge. But the principle of seeking God's glory is biblical. All right, let's look at number 5. He wrestled. To whom my hearty and best thoughts are, and have a long time been so entangled and enthralled in so intricate a labyrinth, that I was even wearied to unwind myself thereout. Air quotes. Sounds like he's agonizing over this. But if anyone is deficient in wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and without reprimand, and it will be given him. James 1:5 in the New English. So he seems to be describing prolonged uncertainty and seeking the right course. What thoughts have you wrestled with? How did that go? Or how did it work out? And did you consider godly counsel? Whether it's from the scripture or from a friend. And number 6, gossip. If the vulgar sort shall tax or taunt me in this my godly labor. Air quotes. So the decision of anticipation of criticism. For am I now seeking the favor of people or of God, or am I striving to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. Galatians 1:10 in the New American. Wolfe anticipated criticism and chose to proceed after seeking approval from his governor and by his own account considering his conscience before God. We've listened to John Wolfe explain his heart in his own words. History allows us to read those words, but Scripture reminds us of something we must never forget. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7 in the New Living. Now that fact can either be comforting or terrifying, depending on your relationship with God. Segment 2, the fragility of peace. History doesn't preserve the details of that spring day, We don't know how many people were gathered, what words were exchanged beyond the Anglican marriage rites, or what emotions filled the air. But we know this: English leaders approved the marriage. Chief Powhatan gave his consent through a trusted relative. And on or about April 5th, 1614, John, Rolfe, and Rebecca became husband and wife. Powhatan approved the marriage, but was not present. Supposedly her uncle, Opachisco, or Apachisco, attended in his place. For years, violence had defined the relationship between the English settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy. Raids, retaliation, mistrust, and bloodshed had become familiar realities on both sides. But now something remarkable happened. The fighting largely ceased. Is this an intermittent peace? Is that the kind of peace you've been having? Intermittent? How about a lasting peace? Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you. John chapter 14, verse 27 in the Revised Standard. Well, what's the opposite of peace? Violence? Unrest? But what's unrest? Anxiety? That's why the other half of this verse is as equally important. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. The rest of John 14:27. Scripture recognizes that peace often depends on more than one person's willingness. Sometimes reconciliation is possible, sometimes it isn't. But for a season, Virginia experienced something that had been missing for years: a measure of peace. But as history repeatedly reminds us, peace established by people is often temporary. Lasting peace begins with reconciliation to God. With fewer attacks disrupting daily life, the English colonists gained something they had rarely enjoyed since Jamestown was founded: time. Time to plant, time to build, time to expand, time to look beyond mere survival. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verses 1 through 8 tells us there's a time or a season for everything. From the time we were born to the time we die. In fact, I encourage you to go and read that and see if you can find where you think you fit in the seasons of time. John Wolfe's experiments with a sweeter strain of tobacco had already begun transforming Virginia's economy. During this period of relative peace, cultivation accelerated. What had started as a promising crop was becoming the colony's economic foundation. Be aware. Do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commandments. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied, when your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have increases, then your heart will become lifted up by self-conceit and arrogance. And you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you, and I want you to fill in the blank. What did he bring you through? What did he lead you through? What great and terrible things did he rescue you from? What symbolic fiery serpents and scorpions did he help you get through or overcome? Thirsty ground, and it was he who brought water. What parched time in your life did he help you through? Did he humble you? Did he humble you by dependence on him, and that he might test you to do good things? Otherwise, you may say in your heart, like so many have already said and live, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. But you shall remember with profound respect the Lord your God, for it is he who has given you power to make wealth. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 11 through 18 in the Amplified. Prosperity is a blessing, but it also brings new temptations. As tobacco fields multiplied, so did the demand for land. As the demand for land increased, pressure on native communities grew. And as expansion continued, new conflicts slowly began taking shape beneath the surface of peace. If tobacco was making Virginia wealthier and peace was making expansion possible, what did the Powhatan Confederacy think about all this? Segment 3, the Powhatan Perspective. While English records celebrate what later becomes known as the Peace of Pocahontas, air quotes, they tell us far less about how Powhatan leaders understood the agreement. We know the fighting largely subsided. We know trade increased. We know communication improved. We know that the marriage marked the end of the First Anglo-Powhatan War and ushered in several years of relative peace, roughly 1614 to 1622. But beyond those observable changes, the historical record becomes much quieter. Was this peace viewed as a lasting reconciliation, a practical truce, a diplomatic pause? The honest answer is that we don't know. And if you've watched a movie, a TV series, or read a book that answers these questions, just know that it's all speculation. As these events unfolded, another influential leader would be emerging within the Powhatan Confederacy. His name was Opichancuno. Now remember that exact pronunciation is difficult. Opichancuno was Powhatan's younger brother, or according to some historians, possibly a close male relative. The exact family relationship is debated, but there is little doubt about his importance. He had long been respected as a capable leader and a warrior, and in the years ahead he would play a defining role in the relationship between the Powhatan Confederacy and the English colony. And more on him later, but for now, we continue. Whether among English governors or indigenous leaders, Scripture reminds us that God remains sovereign over all rulers and nations alike. Human leaders make real decisions with real consequences. I'm sure you've experienced. Yet none of them operate outside his providence. The king's heart is a waterway in the hand of the Lord. He directs it where he pleases. Proverbs 21:1 in the Berean. Now here's where honesty matters most. We don't have a single surviving document written by a Powhatan hand from this period. Everything English colonists recorded about Powhatan intentions came through English interpreters, English scribes, and English assumptions. So when we ask, what did Wahunasaka actually think of this peace, air quotes, we're reading someone else's account from someone else's mind. But historians who've spent careers studying Powhatan political culture, like Helen Roundtree, who's among the most thorough, point to something worth considering. Marriage in the Powhatan world was not a private romantic matter. It was a tool of statecraft. Wahunasaka had built this kind of loyalty before, usually by marrying the daughters of other chiefs himself, so his own children would grow up to become the next generation of leaders in those tribes. A daughter marrying outward into the English was the unusual move for him, not the pattern. So it's worth asking the question differently. Not did Powhatan surrender, air quotes, but did Powhatan see this marriage the way he'd seen his other marriages? A way of pulling a rival power into his own orbit, or on his own terms, as a kind of kingship tribute relationship. Some historians think that's closer to how he understood it than the English version where the marriage reads as the taming of a defeated enemy. Remember, Powhatan himself didn't attend his own daughter's wedding. He sent his brother, Opachisco, in his place. English sources don't tell us why. Was it distance, age, diplomatic caution, a way of benefiting from the peace without personally endorsing English authority? We don't know. Historians debate it. We think there should be an oath between two parties, between us and you. Let us make a covenant with you. You will not harm us just as we have not harmed you. Genesis 26:28 through 29 in the Christian Standard. That's worth contemplating. In Genesis, the outsider is the one who prospered, and the natives initiated the peace out of unease. Flip that lens onto Virginia in 1614, and the question gets sharper. Who exactly needed the peace more? And that's the Wahunosaka side of the peace, as best as history lets us reconstruct it. But peace, even imperfectly understood, doesn't last forever, especially not when one side is getting old. But we all know the real reason why man's peace, or humanity's peace, will never last. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. I like the translation that says desperately wicked. But who can understand it? Jeremiah 17:9 through 10 in the English Standard. Segment 4, An Ocean Away. On June 12, 1616, Rebecca landed at Plymouth, England, with her husband, their infant son, Thomas, and a small delegation of Powhatan travelers, including a respected holy man the English called Tomokomo, also recorded as Utamatomakan. The Virginia Company had sent for them a living, breathing, civilized, air quotes, Powhatan woman was worth more to English investors than any report Wolfe could write. And Wolfe had, in fact, just finished writing one. And Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God." Ruth chapter 1, verse 16 in the King James. Whether Rebecca ever spoke words like Ruth's, we don't know, but she lived them. She already crossed once from Powhatan daughter to Wolfe's wife, from Matoaka to Rebecca. Now she crossed an ocean too, into a world of court dress and buildings and a king she may not have even realized she'd met until afterwards. She was presented at Whitehall Palace in January 1617, seated well by King James himself at a mosque, entitled Ben Jonson's The Vision of the Light. Now, if you're like me, and you're not familiar with what a masque is, and had to look it up like I did, a masque was a festive courtly entertainment involving music, dancing, singing, and acting. There's a lot more to it, but I don't want to get sidetracked. Anyway, English society called her a princess. Camilla Townsend in Pocahontas and the Powhatan Dilemma makes the case that this was less genuine honor than spectacle. A civilized savage, air quotes, put on display to reassure nervous investors their colony was worth the money. Well, I guess both can be true at once. She was generally received with honor, and she may have been used by the Virginia Company. Anyway, while staying outside London, in Brentford, she crossed paths with John Smith. And the only reason I bring this up is because there's possibly a lot of misunderstanding about Pocahontas' relationship with John Smith. You see, historians generally doubt the popular Pocahontas saved John Smith and they later reunited like lovers, air quotes, story, because the most dramatic rescue, air quotes, details come mainly from Smith's own later account with limited early corroboration. And the exact scenes specifics are debated. What seems more likely is that Pocahontas' role involved politically charged interactions, possibly symbolic or ceremonial acts tied to diplomacy, rather than an imminent execution she could easily stop. And while the romantic union, air quotes, framing grew over time as later writers embellished the episode, and her capacity to do the dramatic things described is also questioned by her likely young age at the time, like 11 or 12. Overall, the strongest picture is diplomacy and shifting alliances more than a reliably recorded life or death rescue and instant reunion. In March 1617, after 9 months abroad, the family finally boarded a ship home. And if you're watching, you can see the map behind me where Brentford will be sort of in the upper left-hand corner and London towards the bottom right. And that's Brentford, as the place where she met John Smith. And London would have been the place they would have set out to return home. But they made it as far as Gravesend. That's just Gravesend. How would you like to die there? Anyway, so now on the map you can see Gravesend being on the left. And this is all along the Thames River. But anyway, they just made it to Gravesend before Rebecca fell gravely ill. Historians still don't agree on what it was. Pneumonia, tuberculosis, smallpox, and dysentery have all been proposed and none confirmed. So she was taken ashore. She never got back on the ship. So Rachel died and was buried near the road to Ephrathah, that is Bethlehem. Genesis 35:19 in the Living. Rebecca was buried at St. George's Church, Gravesend, on March 21, 1617, roughly 20 or 21 years old. An ocean from the river she was born on. Her son Thomas also was ill, and too ill to continue the voyage. So Rolfe made the wrenching decision to leave him there in England in his brother's care. And he sailed on without either of them. And you can see Gravesend being on the left and the open waters on the right. Then they would start out to cross the Atlantic. And you can see on the map the letters VA for Virginia under the word Washington. And you can also see the word Bermuda, which is where they shipwrecked. And I want you to pause and think about that. I wonder if John Wolfe could see Bermuda on his way to Virginia. How heart-wrenchingly sad is that? Remember Bermuda? His first wife and newborn daughter died. They named her Bermuda. And now his second wife is dead, back at Gravesend, and his son sick. Ah, man, that's brutal. That's harsh. That's painful, I would think. Have you experienced something like that? Okay. Segment 5. Chief Wahunsanaka. Now, we don't know what Wahunsanaka felt when word reached him about his daughter's death. No record captures it, but within about a year of losing his daughter, his own health gave out. "Oh, my son Absalom, my dear, dear son Absalom, why not me rather than you? My death and not yours. Oh, Absalom, my dear, dear son." 2 Samuel 18:33, the Message. Now, I know we can't put these words in his mouth, but David's grief is perhaps the closest scripture that comes to naming what any father in that position would be experiencing. English, Powhatan, 1617, or today. By the time Rebecca Wolfe was a young wife on the James River, her father was no longer the man who'd first stood face to face with John Smith. Wahunsanaka's birth year isn't precisely recorded. Estimates from different sources land anywhere in the 1540s to the 1550s. But by any account, he was an old man in 1614, likely in his 60s or 70s. He'd been retreating for years, not just in age, but the relations with the English had soured as early as 1609, and Wahunsanaka had already relocated once at his capital at Werowocomoco to Orapax, deeper into the swamps along the Chickahominy River. In 1614, he'd moved again, this time to Matchut on the Pamunkey River, not far from where his brother Opichancuno held his own territory at Ya'ataund. Each move put more distance between himself and the growing English presence on the James River. After these things, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua. Joshua 24:29 and verse 31 in the English Standard. The peace held as long as the man who built it and the generation who remembered why were still alive to hold it up. What happens after that generation is gone is a different question. Aren't we seeing that today? A different generation rising up politically. What happens after that generation is gone is a different question, one this story is about to ask too. In April 1618, Wahunsanaka died. What we know for certain ends about there. What killed him, what he said in his final days, whether he died content or uneasy about the peace he brokered, none of it survives in any record, English or otherwise. Succession among the Powhatan ran through the mother's line, a custom Helen Roundtree, the researcher most historians defer to on Virginia Indian political life, has spent much of her career documenting. Practically speaking, that meant the chiefdom passed sideways first to Wahunsanaka's brother, a man English sources called Apichapam, sometimes recorded as Itopatin, and most accounts describe him as the weaker of the brothers, a caretaker more than a builder. But Opichancuno hadn't been sitting idle. Even before his brother took the title, he'd already been serving as war chief under him, the man handling conflict while his brother held the name. A title in one hand, real capability sitting in the other. Do not trust a nobleman and mortal man in whom there is no salvation. His spirit departs, he returns to the earth. On that very day, his plans perish. Your plan's going to perish after you go? What kind of legacy are you going to leave behind for your children? Anyway, Psalm 146, verses 3 through 4 of the New American. Wahunsanaka's peace had been his peace, built on his relationships, his judgments, his willingness to extend an alliance to a strange and stubborn colony. Whether it could survive him was a question no one in 1618, English or Powhatan, could yet answer. We'll be right back after this commercial. In closing, I'll say this as you listen to the rest of U.S. National Anthem instrumental background music by Visual Habit at pixabay.com. John Rolfe wrestled with his conscience before he ever proposed. He wrote it all down, the stakes, the counsel, the motives he questioned in himself. In April 1614, he married Rebecca. And for a season, Virginia had something it had rarely known: peace. Tobacco grew, settlements expanded. Time, for once, wasn't spent on survival. But we asked a harder question, too. What did the other side of that peace actually think? The honest answer is we don't fully know. The record is English. The silence is Powhatan. And where the record goes quiet, we said so instead of guessing. What we do know is that peace built by one man doesn't outlive that man automatically. In April 1618, Wahun Sanaka died. The peace he'd built didn't die with him, not yet, but the man who held it together did. His brother took the title, but it was another brother, a war chief already, waiting in the wings, who held something more dangerous than a title. And what about John Wolfe? Why did he return? What was he thinking? What kind of welcome did he expect coming back empty-handed, if you will? How is he going to be received? In the next episode, look at what a peace looks like when the man who kept it is gone and the man who never fully trusted it is still here. But rest assured, because peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give it to you as the world does. Do not let your hearts be distressed or lacking in courage. John 14:27 in the New English. Well, hey, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out with me. Don't forget to leave a review. Tell me what's going on with you. Don't forget to subscribe, like, tell your family, friends, neighbors, enemies about the show. Get them to subscribe and like. And until next time, stay safe.